Tucked away in the forgotten corners of GM's vast history are cars that don't fit the usual mold. Not muscle machines, but oddities, innovators, and bold misfits. Built with ambition and sometimes ahead of their time, these 12 vehicles were launched with promise, only to vanish quietly as if GM wanted the world to forget them. Strange, luxurious, or just plain misunderstood, they flickered into existence and then disappeared, leaving behind little more than a mystery. The 1961 Chevrolet Corvair Monza Spider Turbo is one of those fascinating vehicles that sits at the crossroads of innovation and controversy, a car that dared to be different but ultimately got swallowed by politics, public perception, and a changing automotive landscape. At its core, it was one of the earliest production cars in America to feature a turbocharger, a radical leap forward in engineering that foreshadowed the performance tech boom that wouldn't fully catch fire for another 2 decades. But wrapped in the quirky, rear-engined, air-cooled Corvair platform and burdened with a reputation for danger, the Monza Spider became a tragic figure in the history of American car design. Brave, experimental, and ultimately crushed by forces beyond its control. To understand why the 1961 Corvair Monza Spider Turbo is so historically significant, you have to rewind to the late 1950s and early 1960s, when Chevrolet, like many American manufacturers, was beginning to feel the pressure from European imports, Volkswagens, Renaults, and Fiats, that emphasized efficiency, economy, and innovation over brute strength. The Corvair was GM's answer to that challenge. It was rear-engined like the VW Beetle, air-cooled and compact in size. But unlike its German rival, the Corvair's flat 6-boxer engine gave it more potential for refinement and performance. And with the Monza trim, GM aimed squarely at the growing number of Americans who wanted something a little sportier, a little sleeker, and a little more sophisticated than the average Detroit Iron. Enter the Spider. Introduced in 1962 as a 1962 model, after the Monza name debuted earlier, it took the Corvair's small displacement flat 6 engine and added a low-pressure turbocharger, producing a then impressive 150 horsepower out of just a 145 cubic inches. It may not sound like much today, but at the time, that was a remarkable figure, especially for a lightweight compact car. It was the first mass-produced turbocharged car sold in America, beating even the legendary Oldsmobile Jetfire to market by a hair. Turbocharging was virtually unheard of outside of aircraft or exotic racing engines, and to offer it to the average American car buyer was nothing short of revolutionary. The Monza Spider was pitched as a budget-friendly performance coupe for the thinking driver, someone who wanted a dash of European handling and flair without sacrificing domestic convenience. Its aluminum engine, rear-engine layout, and turbo power gave it a driving character completely unlike anything else on American roads. It had real cornering agility thanks to its light front end and independent rear suspension, even if that same layout made it twitchy at the limit. Drivers loved it, especially the younger crowd, and it briefly gave the Corvair a serious performance edge over other compacts. But then came Ralph Nader. His 1965 book, Unsafe at Any Speed, eviscerated the Corvair, specifically the early models with their swing-axle rear suspension, for their supposedly dangerous handling characteristics during hard cornering or emergency maneuvers. Nader painted the Corvair as an unstable death trap, and while many automotive engineers at the time and subsequent studies disputed his claims or said they were exaggerated, the damage was done. Public perception turned. The Corvair, once a darling of innovation, was now the poster child for unsafe automotive design. GM, already uncomfortable with the idea of the Corvair as a performance car, had no choice but to pivot. Despite updating the suspension in 1965 and making it one of the best handling cars in America at the time, the damage to its reputation was irreversible. Sales plummeted, and GM quietly pulled the plug on the turbocharged Spider variant after just a few years. The idea of a turbocharged, European-style American sports coupe faded just as quickly as it had arrived. What's most ironic is that the Monza Spider was so far ahead of its time. Turbocharging would return with a vengeance in the 1980s, when cars like the Buick Grand National, and the Ford Mustang SVO revived the idea of forced induction in performance cars. But the Corvair Spider was the pioneer, laying the groundwork for an era of performance that wouldn't fully blossom until long after the last Spider had left the showroom floor. Today, the 1961-1964 Corvair Monza Spider Turbo is a cult classic among enthusiasts and collectors. It represents not just a technological milestone, but also a what could have been moment in American automotive history. It's a reminder that innovation doesn't always win the day, and that public perception can kill even the most forward-thinking ideas. It's also a symbol of GM's brief but brilliant flirtation with daring engineering, before corporate conservatism and government scrutiny pushed everything back into safer, more conventional territory. In many ways, the Monza Spider Turbo is the American version of a tragic hero, bold, visionary. The 1980 Oldsmobile Omega Bru stands as a curious, largely forgotten footnote from a tumultuous time in General Motors history, a period marked by downsizing, badge engineering, and an increasingly desperate attempt to blend old-school luxury with new-era economy. On paper, the Omega Bru was supposed to be the upscale variant of GM's front-wheel drive X-body revolution. In reality, it was a stopgap dressed in velour and plastic wood grain, a car born into confusion, launched with little support, and dead before anyone really noticed it existed. To understand the Omega Bru, you first have to appreciate what the X-body generation of GM compacts represented. By 1980, America was deep in the post-oil crisis era. Fuel economy and efficiency were king, and the behemoth luxury land yachts of the 1970s were now a liability. GM needed to respond, fast. Their solution was a family of compact front-wheel drive cars meant to compete with increasingly popular imports, like the Honda Accord and VW Rabbit. These new X-bodies, the Chevrolet Citation, Pontiac Phoenix, Buick Skylark, and Oldsmobile Omega, shared platforms, engines, and dimensions, but were dressed differently depending on brand identity. That meant the Omega, especially in its Brougham trim, was supposed to embody Oldsmobile's trademark blend of premium feel and middle-class aspiration. So what did you get in the 1980 Omega Bru? Plenty of superficial luxury cues. Plush velour seats in loud, regal colors, simulated wood grain dash panels, thick pile carpet, padded vinyl roof with opera windows, a lingering stylistic tick from the 1970s, wire wheel covers, and the all-important Brougham badge that suggested this was not just an economy car, this was a statement of success, in theory. Buyers could even opt for two-tone paint schemes, white wall tires, and air conditioning, though power windows were still optional. Under the hood, most Omega Broughams came with a 2.5-liter Iron Duke 4-cylinder, or optionally, the problematic 2.8-liter V6. Either way, performance was not the point. Image was. But that image was brittle from the beginning. The Omega Bru suffered the curse of badge engineering at its most cynical. Underneath all that vinyl and velour was the same basic car as the Chevrolet Citation, itself a controversial vehicle whose quality woes would go on to haunt GM for the rest of the decade. The Citation launched to great fanfare and initial sales success in 1980, but owners quickly discovered shoddy assembly, brake issues, electrical gremlins, and premature rust. The Omega Bru inherited all those flaws, but added a layer of confused marketing. Was it supposed to be a premium compact, a budget luxury car, an alternative to imports? GM never seemed sure. Dealers didn't know how to sell it, and customers didn't know why they should choose it over a Citation, which was cheaper, or a Skylark, which had slightly better brand cachet. And unlike the Cutlass Supreme or Tornado, Oldsmobile's legitimate premium offerings, the Omega Bru felt like it was pretending. There was no performance edge, no standout technology, and no solid luxury credibility. It looked old-fashioned in a rapidly changing market, and its reliability issues made it difficult to justify even as a daily driver. As early as 1982, the writing was on the wall. Sales dropped, the car saw fewer updates, and GM focused on newer platforms like the J-body and A-body cars. By 1984, the Omega was quietly discontinued. Not with a bang, not with a send-off, but with a shrug. There was no collector interest, no enthusiast community, and no mourning from the public. It was gone, and almost nobody noticed. Today, the 1980 Oldsmobile Omega Bru is almost impossible to find, not because it's a rare collectible, but because most were scrapped, abandoned, or forgotten in used car lots decades ago. It has no cult following. There are no tribute builds, no Restamod revivals. Even die-hard Oldsmobile fans often overlook it, choosing to remember the glory days of Rocket 88s, 442s, and Tornados instead. And yet, in its odd way, the Omega Bru tells a very important story, one of corporate overreach, of missed opportunities, and of the long, slow decline of Detroit's prestige marques. It was a car that tried to be everything to everyone and ended up meaning nothing to anyone. A product of compromises and cost-cutting, wrapped in a suit of borrowed luxury that fooled no one for long. If you ever find one at a dusty estate auction or languishing behind a garage, know that you're looking at a symbol of a lost era, not glamorous, not powerful, but undeniably honest in its awkward attempt to survive a world it was never truly built for. The 1967 Pontiac Executive is one of those rare, full-size American cars that somehow manages to be both imposing in presence and nearly invisible in memory. Meant to slot neatly between the well-known Catalina and the luxurious Bonneville, the Executive was General Motors' answer to a question no one was really asking. And the result was a curious anomaly that was more of a marketing placeholder than a standout model. It had the size, it had the power, and it even had Pontiac's signature wide-track aggression. But it lacked one crucial thing: identity. The story of the Executive begins in the mid-1960s, when GM was slicing its brand hierarchy into increasingly narrow slivers. Pontiac was riding high on its performance image, with the GTO shaking up the youth market and the Bonneville dominating as a full-size status symbol. The Catalina, meanwhile, offered affordability with style. But between those two, in price, trim, and equipment, was a gap that Pontiac's product planners thought they could monetize. Thus, the Executive was born in 1967, essentially as a rebadged Catalina with slightly fancier trim and some borrowed features from the Bonneville, such as upgraded upholstery, more chrome, and a more formal look. Mechanically, the Executive was every bit the full-size bruiser. In 1967, it came standard with Pontiac's 400 cubic inch V8 making 265 horsepower, and buyers could option it up to the 428 cubic inch big block if they wanted real muscle under the hood, with up to 376 horsepower in high output form. It had the same chassis as the Catalina and Bonneville, rode on a 121 inch wheelbase, longer for the wagons, and could be had in several body styles: 2-door hardtop, 4-door sedan, 4-door hardtop, and safari wagon. On paper, it was a solid offering, but the problem was, it wasn't different enough from either of its siblings. Where the Bonneville exuded prestige and the Catalina offered value, the Executive was an odd compromise. It wore neither the aura of a luxury flagship nor the swagger of a budget muscle barge. Its name, Executive, sounded dignified, almost corporate, but that was part of the problem. It felt more like a rental fleet designation than a passion-driven model, and Pontiac didn't do much to promote it. There were no Executive-specific ad campaigns, no TV spots with roaring V8s or glitzy showrooms. It was simply there in the catalog. Between two better-known names, buyers were understandably confused. For a few $100s more, you could get a Catalina with more cachet and nearly identical equipment. For a bit more than that, you could have a real Bonneville, which everyone recognized as Pontiac's flagship. And in the muscle-crazed atmosphere of 1967, with GTOs on billboards and Firebirds hitting the streets, the Executive just didn't excite anyone. Even in its station wagon form, the Executive Safari, it was drowned out by more popular, full-size wagons from Chevy, Oldsmobile, and Ford. The Executive lasted just 4 model years, from 1967 to 1970, quietly fading out of the lineup with no farewell and no legacy. GM realized the mid-level trim strategy wasn't working. especially as customers either wanted performance, GTO Firebird, or luxury, Bonneville Grand Prix. The Executive was a victim of Pontiac's own success, squeezed out by better-defined models above and below. Today, the Pontiac Executive exists in that strange collector car limbo. It's rare but not valuable. It's full-size and V8 powered, but not remembered as sporty. It's vintage Detroit iron, but has no real enthusiast following. Most people have never even heard of it, and those who have often confuse it with a Catalina or a Bonneville. Few were preserved, fewer still are restored. It's not on car show posters or collector t-shirts, and its name rarely comes up in Pontiac lore. And yet, that's precisely what makes it so fascinating now. The 1967 Pontiac Executive is a ghost from a time when GM tried to fill every conceivable market gap, even ones that didn't exist. It's a symbol of excess, not of chrome or horsepower, but of segmentation, of overthinking the market, of product planning by committee. If you find one today, perhaps gently fading under a carport in the Midwest, you found more than just a rare Pontiac. You found a relic of an era when GM had so much market power, it could build entire cars on a hunch and let them quietly vanish when no one cared. The 1978 Buick Century Sport Coupe Turbo is one of those strange, brilliant but doomed footnotes in the muscle car's long twilight. A car that arrived too soon in the wrong shape, with the right idea but absolutely none of the follow-through. It was a turbocharged V6-powered midsize coupe wearing a half-vinyl roof and opera windows, in a market still nostalgic for big-block V8s and raw power. Nobody knew what to make of it. Not the dealers, not the buyers, and arguably not even Buick themselves. Yet today it stands as a fascinating proto-Grand National, a warning shot fired in 1978, years before Buick would actually learn how to make turbos sexy. Let's rewind to the late 1970s. Muscle cars were dead or dying. The oil crisis, emissions controls, rising insurance rates, and tightening safety regulations had turned America's V8 dreamscape into a smog-choked mire of malaise-era mediocrity. Horsepower was out. Efficiency was in. But Buick, curiously enough, still harbored a bit of rebellion in its engineering department. Someone there believed that turbocharging, a technology usually associated with exotic sports cars or aircraft, could be the key to preserving performance in the face of downsizing. And so for 1978, Buick dropped a turbocharged 3.8-liter, 231 cubic inch V6 into the aging Century platform. The idea was simple but bold. Take a lightweight engine, bolt on a Garrett turbo, and use that forced induction to recapture some of the low-end torque people missed from their big block days. The turbocharged V6 made a rated 165 horsepower and 280 lb-ft of torque, figures that matched or beat some V8s of the day. It even came with a limited slip differential and firmed-up suspension to help keep the power under control. The car was quickish for the time and certainly unique. In theory, it was everything a forward-thinking performance car should have been. But reality wasn't so kind. First, there was the packaging. The 1978 Buick Century Sport Coupe Turbo looked like a librarian trying to impersonate Evil Knievel. It had the same conservative roof lines, fender skirts, and padded vinyl Landau tops as the rest of the Century line. The word sport was applied liberally, but the visuals didn't back it up. There were no aggressive spoilers, no scoops, no real advertising campaign to explain what this car even was. It didn't look fast, it didn't sound fast. And Buick showrooms weren't exactly filled with salespeople trained to pitch turbo technology. Second, the technology itself was temperamental. Buick was still experimenting with carbureted turbos, and the system used a draw-through setup, meaning the fuel/air mixture was pulled through the turbocharger before being forced into the engine. It was complex, heat-sensitive, and lacked intercooling. Turbo lag was considerable. Heat soak was real. And the carburetor, already a finicky device on a good day, didn't always play nicely with boost. In cold weather or hot conditions, the engine could stumble, ping, or act unpredictably. Reliability was spotty, and repairs were not cheap. Third, the public just wasn't ready. In 1978, the idea of a turbocharged six-cylinder engine seemed bizarre to most American buyers. Performance buyers were still pining for the rumble of V8s, and economy buyers were wary of anything complicated. The Century Turbo fell into an uncanny valley, too strange for traditional muscle fans, too obscure for tech heads, and too unremarkable in appearance to draw showroom traffic. Buick offered the car, but they didn't stand behind it. No big ads, no performance claims, no racing tie-ins. It simply existed. A whispered experiment. Production numbers are vague, but it's estimated that only a few thousand were made, and most are long gone today. They weren't collectible. They weren't preserved. Many ended up as beaters or got parted out when their finicky turbos failed. Yet in hindsight, the 1978 Buick Century Sport Coupe Turbo was ahead of its time. It laid the mechanical foundation for what Buick would perfect later. The 1984 and 1987 Regal Grand National and GNX, which would use a refined, fuel-injected version of the same turbo V6 concept and become performance legends. So the Century Turbo lives on, not in fame but in DNA. It was Buick's first real step into the world of forced induction performance, a lonely, misunderstood pioneer with opera windows. It didn't get the glory, but without it, the turbocharged 80s revolution might never have happened. Find one today, if you can, and you've got a true curiosity, a snapshot of a brand trying something brave before the world was ready. It may not have been the hero, but it was the prologue. The 1970 Chevrolet Kingswood Estate 454 wagon is one of the most gloriously contradictory machines to ever roll off a GM assembly line. A lumbering 9-passenger land yacht with the heart of a muscle car. In a time when the American performance wars were still raging, Chevrolet quietly, almost sheepishly, dropped its formidable 454 cubic inch LS5 big block V8 into a full-size station wagon and called it a day. No stripes, no badges, no drag strip fanfare, just a cavernous family hauler with enough torque to tow a small planet. It was one of the most outrageous sleepers ever built, and yet almost nobody remembers it. The Kingswood Estate sat at the top of Chevy's full-size wagon lineup, a sibling to the Caprice and Impala in spirit, but with its own Baroque sense of luxury and utility. In 1970, GM redesigned its full-size cars with sweeping fuselage bodywork, curved glass, and more presence than anything this side of a Cadillac. The Kingswood Estate wore wood grain applique along its flanks, had a roofline you could land a helicopter on, and came standard with a rear-facing third-row seat. It was a car built for road trips, for hauling dogs and groceries, and 3 generations of family. It was not, at least on the surface, a drag strip weapon, but then came the engine options. The LS5 454 V8 was rated at 360 gross horsepower and a monumental 500 lb-ft of torque. This was the same engine available in the Chevelle SS 454, and while the wagon didn't get the more savage LS6, which made 450 HP, the LS5 was no slouch. It was a hydraulic lifter big block tuned for street torque, and in a straight line, it could smoke its tires, bark through the gears, and leave lighter cars gasping. With the optional turbo hydromatic 400 transmission and 3.31 rear gears, it could launch with shocking aggression, all while carrying 9 passengers, luggage, and probably a canoe on the roof. There were no decals or special hood scoops, no performance badging. In fact, you could easily mistake a 454 powered Kingswood for a base model if you didn't notice the dual exhaust or the subtly badged 454 fender emblems. Chevy offered no marketing campaign around it. No commercials bragged about beating Mustangs with your kid's stroller in the back. To GM, this was just an option on the order sheet, a response to the customer who wanted Cadillac power without Cadillac price or pretension. It was a car for the guy who towed a boat on weekends, drove his kids to school during the week, and wanted to do it all with minimal fuss and maximum grunt. And yet, there was a strange brilliance to the idea. In an era before SUVs, this was the American dream. One car that could do everything. Tow, haul, race if you were discreet about it, The 454 Kingswood could tow 5,000 plus pounds without breaking a sweat, cruise all day at 80 mph with the air conditioning blowing, and then surprise the hell out of a small block Camaro at the stoplight. It was a brute in a cardigan sweater, a car that made zero apologies for its size, weight, or appetite. It drank fuel like a jet engine. Single-digit MPG was common, but in 1970 that didn't matter. What did matter, unfortunately, was timing. 1970 was the peak of the muscle car era, but it was also the beginning of the end. Insurance companies were cracking down on high-performance cars. Emissions regulations were on the horizon. By 1971, the LS5 was detuned. By 1973, the big wagons were choked by catalytic converters and weight gain. The Kingswood name itself would disappear after 1972, replaced by the Caprice and Impala wagons, and the whole idea of a performance wagon would vanish for decades. Very few buyers opted for the LS5 engine in the Kingswood Estate. Exact numbers are unclear, but most estimates suggest it was only a tiny fraction of total production. After all, it was an expensive option, and one with little public visibility. Most of these cars were bought by quiet gearheads, fleet buyers, or just dads who liked to go fast but couldn't justify a two-door. Today, surviving examples are almost non-existent. Most were driven into the ground, rusted out, or crushed when gas prices rose. But to the rare collector or historian who knows where to look, the 1970 Chevrolet Kingswood Estate 454 remains one of the most eccentric and exhilarating artifacts of GM's muscle era. It wasn't loud about what it could do. It didn't need to be. It was the definition of stealth power. A 5,000-pound Q-ship built to move families and leave tire marks. It may have never gotten the love, but it absolutely earned the legend. The 1963 Oldsmobile Jetfire is one of the most fascinating, misunderstood, and ultimately tragic experiments to ever emerge from General Motors during the golden age of American automotive excess. While the muscle car era is remembered for raw displacement and rumbling V8s, the Jetfire told a different story. One of science fiction ambition, aerospace styling, and high-tech engineering that arrived far too soon for the world around it. Oldsmobile's Jetfire was based on the compact F85 Cutlass platform, a car originally conceived to offer modest power in a lightweight package. But someone in Oldsmobile engineering, perhaps fueled by the space race, turbojet inspiration, or pure mechanical madness, decided that wasn't enough. Instead of going bigger, they went smarter. What they unveiled in 1962 and 1963 was a groundbreaking marvel, a turbocharged, all-aluminum 215 cubic inch V8 with a fluid injection system, a space-age dashboard, and a name that sounded like something from a Buck Rogers comic. Let that sink in. In 1963, long before the words turbo and fuel injection were even part of the American automotive vocabulary, Oldsmobile offered a forced induction V8 that made 215 horsepower and 300 lb-ft of torque from just 3.5 liters. That output was impressive even by 1960s standards, and it was far more than a standard F85 or even some larger cars of the day. The Jetfire was essentially GM's first attempt at using modern technology to chase horsepower gains without simply bolting on more displacement. In that sense, it was an ancestor of the entire modern performance car philosophy. The heart of the Jetfire's magic was its Garrett T5 turbocharger, a mechanical centrifugal unit paired with a draw-through carburetor setup. But to prevent detonation pre-ignition, engineers added a second layer of complexity. A fluid injection system that sprayed a special mixture of distilled water, methanol, and corrosion inhibitor, called turbo rocket fluid, into the intake stream under boost. And it was a clever workaround for the high compression ratio, 10.25:1, as it cooled the intake charge and prevented pinging. In theory, it was brilliant. In practice, a nightmare. Dealers didn't understand it. Owners didn't maintain it. Most forgot or didn't know they needed to refill the turbo rocket fluid reservoir regularly. When the fluid ran dry, the turbo system locked out boost to prevent engine damage. But drivers didn't like that. Many grew frustrated with inconsistent power or confusing dashboard warning lights. Mechanics, unfamiliar with the injection system, often misdiagnosed problems or simply bypassed the turbo altogether. Soon, GM fielded waves of complaints and warranty claims. To stem the tide of chaos, GM authorized dealers to convert Jetfires back to standard carbureted setups. The turbo hardware was often removed entirely and scrapped. Within a year, the writing was on the wall. GM pulled the Jetfire from the market after 1963, with fewer than 10,000 units built between 1962 and 1963. The entire project was quietly buried in corporate memory, and Oldsmobile would never again speak its name. The turbo dream had burned too hot, too fast, and collapsed under its own complexity. Ironically, just a few years later, the same 215 aluminum V8 would find new life in the UK, under Rover, where it would power Land Rovers, MGs, and even Tabors for decades. Meanwhile, GM's other turbocharged experiment, the Corvair Monza Spider, would suffer a similar fate. It wouldn't be until the late 1970s and early 80s, with the likes of the Buick Regal Grand National and Turbo Trans Am, that GM would again dare to revisit turbocharging, this time with better computers, better fuel, and a more accepting audience. Today, surviving Jetfires are exceedingly rare, and even rarer are those with their original turbo components intact and functioning. They are prized by collectors not just for their scarcity, but for what they represent. A bold, audacious leap into the future, made in a time when America still believed in engineering its way to the stars. In a sense, the 1963 Oldsmobile Jetfire was never meant to win the horsepower wars. It was a statement, a declaration that Oldsmobile, often seen as a conservative middle child of GM, could innovate with the best of them. It was a car that dared to ask, "What if?" before the world was ready to answer. And though it failed in its time, its legacy echoes, a turbocharged whisper from a more imaginative era. The 1986 Cadillac Simmeronduro is widely regarded as one of the most notorious failures in Cadillac's illustrious history, a car that stands as a symbol of corporate miscalculation, badge engineering gone horribly wrong, and the painful erosion of a brand once synonymous with American luxury and prestige. In the mid-1980s, Cadillac found itself at a crossroads. Faced with intensifying competition from European and Japanese luxury automakers, as well as a shifting American market that increasingly favored smaller, more fuel-efficient vehicles, GM sought to create a compact luxury sedan to rival imports such as the BMW 3 Series and Mercedes-Benz 190e. However, instead of developing a bespoke model with the refinement and sophistication expected of the Cadillac name, GM decided to rebadge the Chevrolet Cavalier, a basic entry-level economy car, as the Cimarron, hoping that Cadillac's cachet alone would entice buyers. The Cimarron was introduced in 1982 and shared nearly all its components with the Cavalier, from the front-wheel drive layout, chassis, and suspension, to the unremarkable 2.8-liter V6 engine, and even much of the interior plastic and trim. Despite Cadillac's attempts to dress it up with slightly more luxurious upholstery, unique badging, and extra sound insulation, the fundamental flaws remain glaringly obvious. The car lacked the powerful engines, elegant craftsmanship, and smooth ride that Cadillac buyers had come to expect. Instead of a sophisticated and commanding luxury sedan, the Cimarron felt more like a glorified Chevy compact with a pricier badge. It was underpowered, plasticky, and uninspired. A far cry from the large, refined luxury vehicles Cadillac had been known for since the 1930s. Sales of the Cimarron languished from the start, and the car quickly developed a reputation as a joke among car enthusiasts, dealers, and critics alike. It became an easy target for ridicule, seen as emblematic of GM's larger quality control and strategic problems during the era. The Cimarron alienated loyal Cadillac customers who felt betrayed by the brand's turn to badge engineering, and it failed to attract new buyers who wanted true European-style luxury and performance. It was a car that neither Cadillac's traditional buyers nor luxury compact buyers could embrace. By 1986, GM attempted to inject some life into the struggling Cimarron lineup with the introduction of the Doro edition, an effort to add some perceived luxury and exclusivity to the model. The Doro, name Italian for of gold, was meant to evoke prestige and sophistication. The Doro package included gold-tone exterior trim accents, unique badging, special gold pinstriping, upgraded interior fabrics, and some cosmetic enhancements designed to give the Cimarron a more upscale presence. It was a classic case of dressing up the superficial features in hopes of distracting buyers from the car's fundamental shortcomings. However, these cosmetic changes could not disguise the Cimarron's core deficiencies. Beneath the gold-trimmed exterior, the Doro was still the same underwhelming, compact front-wheel drive Cavalier with minimal power and a cheap-feeling interior. It still lacked any semblance of the performance, comfort, and craftsmanship that defined Cadillac's heritage. The Doro failed to win over buyers or critics and was dismissed as a desperate marketing gimmick. It did nothing to reverse the Cimarron's poor sales or mend Cadillac's tarnished image. The Cimarron Doro's limited run did nothing to save the model, and production of the Cimarron ended in 1980. The entire episode left a stain on Cadillac's legacy, a painful chapter that many Cadillac enthusiasts and historians prefer to forget. It served as a glaring example of the perils of badge engineering when executed without care or respect for brand identity. The Cimarron damaged Cadillac's reputation at a time when the company could least afford it, undermining consumer confidence and highlighting the missteps of GM's management during the 1980s. In retrospect, the Cimarron Doro and the Cimarron as a whole are instructive symbols of how bad decisions can have long-lasting consequences. The car stands as a cautionary tale of how attempting to cut costs and chase market trends without a clear vision or commitment to quality can devastate a prestigious brand. It underscores the importance of authenticity and product integrity in the luxury market, where customers expect more than just a badge. Yet the Cimarron failure also galvanized Cadillac in the years that followed. The brand took hard lessons from the debacle and redoubled its focus on innovation, design, and engineering. This introspection eventually led to a renaissance in the 1990s and 2000s, as Cadillac reinvented itself with new models that better reflected its heritage and the expectations of discerning luxury buyers. The 1964 Pontiac Banshee II prototype represents one of the most fascinating what-if stories in American muscle car history, a bold, visionary project that could have reshaped Pontiac's identity and challenged the Mustang's rise, but was ultimately snuffed out by corporate caution. Under the direction of John DeLorean, Pontiac's charismatic and ambitious young executive, the Banshee was conceived as a sleek, lightweight two-seat sports coupe that aimed to combine striking design, athletic performance, and affordable pricing. It was meant to be Pontiac's answer to the growing pony car craze ignited by the 1964 Ford Mustang, a car that would inject excitement into the brand and appeal to younger buyers hungry for style and speed. The Banshee I was stunning in every way. Its long, low hood, sharply tapered fastback roofline, and aggressive nose gave it an almost futuristic look compared to the more traditional muscle cars of the era. The styling was fresh and daring, with a hint of European flair blended with Pontiac's signature details. Mechanically, the Banshee was designed to be nimble and quick, sporting a lightweight chassis and promising potent V8 engines that could deliver serious performance in a compact package. It was a genuine sports car, not just a muscle car with big power, an attempt to marry handling, agility, and style in a way that few American cars at the time dared to try. Despite its obvious potential, the Banshee project ran into a major roadblock inside General Motors. GM's leadership, notoriously conservative and protective of their existing brands, feared that the Banshee would cannibalize sales from the Corvette, the company's flagship sports car and one of America's most iconic performance vehicles. The thought of Pontiac, traditionally seen as a step below Chevrolet, producing a rival that might eclipse the Corvette, was unacceptable to GM executives. They were unwilling to risk upsetting the delicate brand hierarchy and market segmentation they had carefully cultivated. As a result, the Banshee I was abruptly canceled before it ever reached production. Only 2 prototypes were built, one fully functional coupe and another unfinished or used for design validation, and both have become priceless artifacts today. These prototypes sit as tantalizing reminders of what might have been, a genuinely exciting, beautifully designed Pontiac sports car that could have altered the muscle car landscape in the mid-1960s. The cancellation of the Banshee was a huge disappointment to John DeLorean and many Pontiac enthusiasts who saw the car as a fresh, youthful direction that could have energized the brand well before the arrival of the Firebird in 1967. The Firebird, while successful in its own right, was a more conventional pony car that shared many components with the Camaro and lacked the Banshee's unique personality and radical design. The Banshee's fate exemplifies how internal politics, brand protectionism, and risk aversion at GM often quashed innovation, even when the potential rewards were high. Today, the 1964 Pontiac Banshee prototype is revered as a rare, almost mythical piece of muscle car lore. The surviving cars are displayed in museums and private collections, where they continue to captivate enthusiasts with their sleek lines and the story behind their untimely demise. The Banshee remains a symbol of Pontiac's lost opportunity to redefine itself as a maker of genuine American sports cars and a testament to the complicated corporate dynamics that shaped the muscle car era. In retrospect, the Banshee's story is both inspiring and bittersweet, a glimpse into a world where daring ideas clashed with conservative realities, and where one of Pontiac's most promising chapters was closed before it could begin. It fuels the imagination of collectors and historians who wonder how different the muscle car scene and Pontiac's legacy might have been if the Banshee had been allowed to roar onto America's roads instead of being silenced in the boardroom. The 1973 Chevrolet Laguna Estate wagon represents a fascinating, often overlooked chapter in General Motors history, a vehicle that embodies the complex crossroads American automakers faced during the early 1970s. As muscle cars were beginning to lose their grip on the market due to rising insurance premiums, government-mandated emissions controls, and an emerging fuel crisis, GM attempted to fuse performance, practicality, and a touch of luxury into one of its lesser-known full-size wagons, the Laguna Estate. At its core, the Laguna Estate was an upscale derivative of the Malibu wagon, designed to offer families and suburban buyers more than just basic transportation. It featured a plush interior that leaned heavily on comfort and style, with velour or leatherette upholstery, thick carpeting, deluxe door panels, and an inviting cockpit that could accommodate up to 9 passengers. The exterior design, though not radical, embraced popular trends of the era with large chrome accents and simulated wood-grain side paneling, a nod to the nostalgic woody wagons that had once been the family car of choice. The combination gave it a look of understated luxury while maintaining the unmistakable Chevrolet identity. However, what made the Laguna Estate truly stand out in a sea of suburban family haulers was its availability with high-performance engines, including the powerful 454 cubic inch V8 big block. This massive engine, capable of producing robust horsepower and torque, turned what was otherwise a lumbering, spacious wagon into a surprisingly quick and muscular vehicle, one that could easily embarrass many smaller muscle cars at its stoplights or on open highways. Yet despite this potent engine-out option, the Laguna Estate was never positioned or marketed as a true performance car. Instead, it occupied an ambiguous space, a luxurious family wagon with muscle car roots, but without the marketing firepower or clear identity of pure muscle cars like the Chevelle SS or Monte Carlo. This identity crisis played a significant role in the Laguna Estate's swift descent into obscurity. While the big block powertrain suggested a car built for excitement, its heavy frame and considerable size muted any sense of true agility or sportiness. The ride was plush but ponderous, a quality more aligned with luxury than performance. Meanwhile, consumers faced with soaring fuel prices and tightening regulations were becoming increasingly cautious about buying gas-guzzling wagons, no matter how well appointed. Insurance companies were also imposing steep premiums on powerful engines, further discouraging the family buyers who might otherwise have considered such a vehicle. Chevrolet's marketing strategy for the Laguna Estate was tepid at best, with little effort to clarify its purpose or attract a specific audience. It was caught between worlds, too expensive and feature-rich for the economy-conscious family wagon buyer, yet lacking the performance pedigree and street cred to lure hardcore muscle car fans. This left it in an awkward position that few buyers could easily define or justify. By 1976, just a few years after its introduction, GM quietly dropped the Laguna Estate from its lineup, refocusing the Malibu wagon back to simpler trims and more economical engines. Today, the 1973 Chevrolet Laguna Estate wagon is a rare sight, often dismissed by muscle car purists and collectors alike as a bloated, unfocused vehicle. But for those who understand the era's tumultuous automotive landscape, the Laguna Estate stands as a compelling symbol of transition. It illustrates how muscle cars, once kings of performance and style, were forced to evolve or perish amid sweeping social, economic, and regulatory changes. It also highlights GM's attempts to adapt, albeit imperfectly, by blending luxury, space, and power in a single vehicle. Collectors who stumble upon a well-preserved Laguna Estate often find themselves with a curious piece of history, one that defies easy categorization, but offers a glimpse into a moment when American car makers were trying to hold on to muscle car glory while grappling with the new realities of the 1970s. Far from the spotlight, the Laguna Estate's story is a rich and nuanced one, representing the last embers of a fading muscle car era, married awkwardly to the family-oriented wagon market, a unique combination that few dared to create and even fewer embraced. The 1982 Pontiac J2000 hatchback stands as a fascinating but largely forgotten chapter in Pontiac's history, a model that encapsulated the struggles and growing pains of American automakers during the early 1980s, a time when the entire industry was grappling with seismic shifts in consumer preferences, fuel economy standards, and competitive pressure from increasingly sophisticated foreign imports. At its core, the J2000 was Pontiac's bold leap into the front-wheel drive compact segment, a category that was rapidly gaining traction as buyers demanded smaller, more fuel-efficient vehicles amidst soaring gas prices and tightening emissions regulations. Built on the General Motors J-Body platform, a shared foundation that underpinned numerous vehicles across GM's brands, the J2000 was intended to deliver the practicality and efficiency that the market craved. However, the result was a car that never quite achieved the identity or character Pontiac hoped for, instead drifting into the realm of mediocrity. From the outset, the design of the J2000 was a source of frustration for many enthusiasts and critics alike. Unlike the striking, performance-oriented cars that Pontiac was historically known for, the J2000's exterior was awkward and uninspired. The hatchback silhouette, while practical, was executed with awkward proportions that failed to capture the sleek, youthful vibe the brand attempted to project. The front fascia featured a blunt, almost generic grille and headlight assembly that lacked aggression or flair. Meanwhile, the rear end, with its oversized and somewhat clunky hatch and taillights, looked like it had been grafted on without much thought to balance or style cohesion. This patchwork of styling cues made the J2000 look less like a coherent vehicle and more like a collection of parts awkwardly stuck together, a stark contrast to the muscle-bound, performance-first Pontiacs of the previous decade. Beneath the surface, the J2000's performance credentials left much to be desired. While Pontiac enthusiasts had long celebrated robust V8s and spirited handling, the J2000 was powered by modest four-cylinder engines that emphasized fuel economy over excitement. The base 2.5-liter inline-four, along with an optional overhead cam 2.8-liter V6, offered decent but unremarkable power output that struggled to deliver a spirited driving experience. In a market segment where Japanese competitors like the Honda Civic and Toyota Corolla were setting new benchmarks for refinement, reliability, and fun-to-drive dynamics, the J2000's drivetrain felt dated and uninspired. Acceleration was sluggish, and the chassis, while competent for daily commuting, lacked the agility or feedback that enthusiasts might have hoped for. The suspension setup prioritized comfort over cornering precision, further distancing the J2000 from Pontiac's performance roots. Inside, the story was much the same. The cabin materials were uninspired, with hard plastics and a drab layout that echoed GM's broader cost-cutting measures during this era. The interior lacked the driver-focused design and boldness that earlier Pontiacs had featured. While the hatchback format did provide practical cargo space, the overall atmosphere was plain, with controls and instrumentation that felt outdated compared to the growing sophistication of Japanese interiors. Features were sparse, and the ergonomics left little to excite or engage the driver beyond the basics of transport. Compounding its shortcomings, the Pontiac J2000 suffered from a lack of clear marketing direction. Pontiac was caught between its heritage as a performance-oriented brand and the need to compete in the economy segment, resulting in a confused message to potential buyers. The J2000 was neither a true performance car nor a standout economy vehicle. It was a compromise that didn't fully satisfy either crowd. This ambivalence meant that the car failed to develop a passionate following, and sales reflected this lukewarm reception. Dealers struggled to push the model effectively, and consumers often opted for more stylish or better-performing competitors. By the mid-1980s, Pontiac recognized that the J2000 nameplate was more of a liability than an asset, and the model was rebranded as the Sunbird. While the Sunbird would eventually enjoy modest success, including sportier trims and better marketing, the original 1982 J2000 remained a forgotten precursor, a symbol of Pontiac's uneasy transition from its muscle car glory days to the challenges of the compact car era. Today, the 1982 Pontiac J2000 hatchback is an obscure relic of a time when American automakers were forced to rethink everything. It's a car that speaks to the difficulty of adapting legacy brands to new realities, caught between nostalgia for powerful, aggressive cars and the practical demands of fuel economy and emissions. For collectors, the J2000 isn't a sought-after classic, but it holds a certain charm as a snapshot of Pontiac. The 1954 Buick Skylark isn't the familiar 60s muscle or mid-size car most people think of. It's something far rarer and far more elegant, a true classic that stands as a shining but often overlooked chapter in Buick's storied history. This was the first Skylark, a car that appeared in just 1953 and 1954 as a limited production, handcrafted convertible, the very definition of early post-war American luxury and style innovation. The Skylark was born from Buick's desire to produce something truly special, a halo car that combined the best of design flair and engineering prowess. It wasn't just another model. It was intended to showcase Buick's mastery of V8 technology and sophisticated styling at a time when the American auto industry was booming with optimism and creativity. Unlike mass-produced cars, the Skylark was built in limited numbers. Approximately 1,690 units in 1953 and only around 1,300 in 1954, making it extremely rare and highly coveted today. Stylistically, the Skylark was a masterpiece. It featured wire-spoke wheels, a feature usually reserved for high-end European sports cars and luxury convertibles, lending it an air of sophistication and exclusivity. Its sweeping aerodynamic lines contrasted beautifully with the bulkier, boxier cars of the era. The long hood, subtle chrome accents, and graceful curves created an impression of effortless elegance, while the convertible top made it a glamorous statement car for cruising sunny streets or showing off at prestigious events. This was a car designed not just to get from point A to B, but to be admired every inch of the way. Under the hood, Buick equipped the Skylark with their latest V8 engine technology, the 322 cubic inch nailhead V8, which was cutting edge for its time. Producing a healthy 188 horsepower, it was a powerhouse that offered strong performance for a luxury convertible. The engine was smooth and robust, fitting perfectly with the Skylark's refined image. Buick's nailhead V8 was known for its unique vertical valve covers and strong low-end torque, making the Skylark both a refined cruiser and a car with respectable muscle under its sleek skin. Despite all this, the Skylark never really got the marketing push or dealership spotlight it deserved. Buick's management at the time seemed reluctant or unsure how to position the car in the rapidly evolving market. The price was high, well above the average Buick buyer's budget, which limited sales and made the Skylark a niche product rather than a mainstream success. GM's strategy focused more on mass-market vehicles, and this exquisite convertible didn't fit neatly into their plans. After just 2 model years, the Skylark name was quietly shelved. The name itself would return years later, but not on anything resembling this original luxury convertible. Instead, it was reborn in the 1960s as a mid-size, more affordable model designed to capture the muscle and sporty market. That later Skylark shared nothing with the refined and rare 1954 original. Apart from the name, a name that once represented exclusivity and elegance, later attached to a very different kind of car. Today, the 1954 Buick Skylark convertible is a prized collector's treasure, admired not just for its rarity, but for its timeless beauty and the glimpse it offers into a fleeting era of American automotive history when design ambition and engineering excellence intersected. It's a car that many enthusiasts wish had been given more recognition in its time, and whose graceful presence on classic car shows reminds us that sometimes the most extraordinary cars come and go quietly, leaving behind a legacy that only true connoisseurs fully appreciate. The 1975 Chevrolet Cosworth Vega is a fascinating yet often overlooked chapter in the saga of American compact performance cars, marking a bold but ultimately flawed attempt by General Motors to fuse cutting-edge European engineering with the mass-market appeal of the Chevrolet Vega. At a time when the muscle car era was drawing to a close, emissions regulations were tightening, and consumer tastes were shifting towards smaller, more fuel-efficient vehicles. The Cosworth Vega represented GM's hope to capture a new niche, a technologically advanced, sporty compact car that could still deliver engaging performance without the fuel-guzzling or insurance headaches associated with traditional muscle cars. The story begins with the Vega itself, a car that had a difficult reputation from the start. Introduced in 1970 as Chevrolet's answer to the growing compact car market, the Vega was intended to be affordable, economical, and stylish enough to appeal to young buyers. However, the car's aluminum block engine and other innovative design features were plagued by reliability issues, poor build quality, and corrosion problems, leading to a lasting stigma. Yet GM wasn't ready to give up on the platform just yet. Instead, they looked to elevate the Vega by injecting a dose of high-tech performance through a partnership with Cosworth Engineering, a legendary British motorsports and engine tuning firm famed for their success in Formula One racing and high-performance road cars. The centerpiece of this effort was the Cosworth-developed 2.0-liter inline-4 engine, equipped with dual overhead camshafts and a sophisticated aluminum cylinder head, which was a rarity among American-made cars at the time. This engine produced a respectable 122 horsepower, a notable increase over the standard Vega power plant, and promised a sporty, high-revving character more akin to European sports sedans than American compacts. The twin-cam design allowed for better breathing and efficiency at higher RPMs, giving the car a unique performance flavor. On the outside, the Cosworth Vega was visually distinct from its mundane siblings. It sported glossy black paint with striking gold accents, including unique pinstriping and gold-painted aluminum wheels, a look that was both bold and elegant. The car also featured aerodynamic enhancements like a front chin spoiler and a rear spoiler that added to its sporty appearance. Inside, subtle touches like special badging and upgraded instrumentation set the Cosworth apart, giving it a more driver-focused atmosphere. However, beneath this promising exterior lay a tangled web of challenges that ultimately doomed the car's success. While 122 horsepower may sound decent on paper, it was not enough to truly excite driving enthusiasts, especially when weighed against the car's weight and the performance expectations of the mid-1970s market. European competitors such as the BMW 2002 and the Alfa Romeo GTV offered similarly sized cars with sharper handling and more robust reputations. Additionally, the Cosworth Vega suffered from the same build quality and reliability issues that plagued the regular Vega, including engine durability concerns, which undermined consumer confidence. Furthermore, the Cosworth Vega carried a higher price tag than the standard models, a tough sell for buyers who were already wary of the Vega name. Its complexity also meant more expensive and complicated maintenance, something the average American buyer wasn't eager to take on. Compounding these problems was the shifting automotive landscape. Fuel crises, stricter emissions controls, and a rapidly growing interest in front-wheel drive, fuel-efficient imports meant the Cosworth Vega's performance niche was shrinking fast. GM produced just 3,508 Cosworth Vegas in 1975, the sole model year for this special variant. Despite some positive reviews praising its handling and engine sophistication, the car failed to gain traction in the marketplace. GM quietly discontinued it after 1 year, and shifted focus away from sporty small cars, leaving the Cosworth Vega as a short-lived niche experiment. In retrospect, the Cosworth Vega was a vehicle ahead of its time in some ways, an early attempt to bring sophisticated European engine technology to the American market, and a glimpse at what could have been a more refined, performance-oriented future for compact cars. Unfortunately, it was weighed down by its inherited flaws, poor timing, and the harsh realities of the mid-70s automotive climate. Today, the Cosworth Vega is a rare collector's item prized for its uniqueness and technical pedigree, embodying the tension between ambition and limitation that defined an important transition period in automotive history. In essence, the 1975 Chevrolet Cosworth Vega stands as a poignant reminder that innovation alone isn't always enough. Without the right market conditions, build quality, and brand trust,